The dust swirled around Beatrice Keller's black mourning dress as she stood alone at the freshly turned earth, her hands trembling despite the brutal Texas heat that shimmered across the Bandera cemetery in waves thick enough to taste. 3 days had passed since they lowered Thomas into the ground. 3 days since the fever took him so fast she barely had time to say goodbye. 3 days since her world crumbled into nothing but empty silence. And the overwhelming weight of being 24 years old and completely alone in a town that seemed to forget widows existed the moment the funeral ended. The other women had brought casseroles and kind words that rang hollow. The men had tipped their hats and looked away. And now she stood in her small house on the edge of town, wondering how she would survive the coming months with winter approaching, and no money left after paying the doctor's bills that had done nothing to save her husband anyway. Beatrice pressed her palm against the rough wooden door frame and stared out at the main street of Bandera, watching the usual afternoon traffic of horses and wagons, listening to the distant sound of the saloon piano that never seemed to stop playing. Thomas had been a good man, a shopkeeper who treated her kindly during their 2 years of marriage, but she could not pretend their union had been born of passionate love rather than practical necessity when her parents died and left her orphaned at 22. Now that practicality had abandoned her too, leaving her with a house she could not afford to keep and skills that did not extend much beyond cooking and sewing, neither of which paid enough to live on in 1885 Texas. She was contemplating selling her mother's wedding ring when she heard the knock at the door, solid and certain, different from the tentative taps of the church ladies who had stopped coming after the second day. When she opened it, she found herself looking up at a man she had seen around town but never spoken to, tall and broad-shouldered with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his worn hat. His eyes were an unexpected shade of blue, like the sky just before sunset, and they held something she had not seen in anyone else's gaze since Thomas died, something that looked almost like genuine concern. "Mrs. Keller," he said, his voice rough but gentle, like gravel wrapped in velvet. "My name is Daniel Hawthorne. I work the cattle ranch about 5 miles north of here. I heard about your husband, and I wanted to pay my respects, though I know I am late in doing so." "Thank you," Beatrice managed, uncertain what else to say to this stranger who stood on her porch with his hat now in his hands, turning it slowly between calloused fingers. "That is kind of you." Daniel shifted his weight, and she noticed he seemed uncomfortable, as though he had rehearsed this conversation in his head but now found the actual words escaping him. "I also heard," he continued slowly, "that you might be in need of work. My boss, Mr. Richardson, he has been looking for someone to help his wife at the main house. Cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. It would come with room and board if you needed it, and a fair wage besides. I thought, if you were interested, I could introduce you." Beatrice stared at him, something tight and painful loosening in her chest for the first time in days. "Why would you do this for me? You do not even know me." "No, madam, I do not," Daniel admitted, meeting her eyes with an honesty that made her breath catch. "But I know what it is to be alone and grieving, and I know that sometimes the difference between surviving and going under is whether someone bothers to extend a hand. I figured I would bother." The simplicity of it, the straightforward kindness without expectation, nearly undid her completely. She felt tears burning behind her eyes and had to look away, focusing on the dusty street beyond his shoulder. "I would be very grateful for an introduction," she said quietly. "Then I will come by tomorrow morning with the wagon if that suits you," Daniel said. "Early before the heat gets too bad. You can meet Mrs. Richardson and see if it is a good fit." "Tomorrow morning," Beatrice repeated, nodding. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Hawthorne. Daniel, he corrected gently. Just Daniel is fine. She watched him walk away, his long stride covering the ground with easy confidence, and wondered why this cowboy had chosen to help her when no one else had even thought to offer. That night, she barely slept, her mind spinning between grief for Thomas and the terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, she would not have to face the coming winter alone and destitute after all. Daniel arrived exactly when he said he would, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 patient horses. The morning air still held a hint of coolness, though the sun was already climbing toward its punishing zenith. Beatrice had dressed in her best black dress, the one without patches or stains, and pinned her auburn hair as neatly as she could manage. She had not looked at herself closely in the mirror for days, but now she noticed how pale she had become, how the grief had carved shadows beneath her green eyes. "Morning," Daniel greeted, hopping down to help her into the wagon with a steadiness that suggested he did this sort of thing often. His hand was warm and solid when she took it, and she tried not to think about how long it had been since anyone had touched her with such casual, respectful care. The ride to the Richardson ranch took about 40 minutes, and at first they traveled in silence, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the steady clip of hooves on the hard, packed dirt road. Beatrice kept her eyes on the landscape, watching the scrub brush and occasional oak trees roll past, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Have you lived in Bandera long?" Daniel asked eventually, his voice cutting through her anxious thoughts. 2 years, she replied. "Since I married Thomas. Before that, I lived in San Antonio with my parents." "What brought you to Bandera?" "Thomas had inherited his uncle's shop. He needed a fresh start, and I needed." She trailed off, not sure how to explain the complicated mixture of loneliness and practicality that had led her to accept Thomas's proposal after knowing him for only 3 weeks. "You needed a fresh start, too," Daniel finished for her, his tone understanding rather than judgmental. "Yes," she said simply. "And now you need another one," he observed. Beatrice looked at him then, really looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road, but there was something in his profile, something strong and steady, that made her want to trust him. "I did not expect to be widowed so young," she admitted. "I do not know how to do this." "Nobody does," Daniel said. "You just keep moving forward because stopping is not an option. You sound like you speak from experience." His jaw tightened slightly. "I lost my wife and daughter 4 years ago, cholera outbreak. I was away on a cattle drive when it happened. By the time I got back, they had already been buried for a week." The raw pain in those simple words made Beatrice's throat constrict. "I am so sorry." "So am I," Daniel said. "Every single day. But I learned that grief is not something you get over. It is something you carry. The weight does not disappear, but you get stronger at holding it." They rode in silence for a while after that, but it felt different now, less like the awkwardness of strangers and more like the quiet understanding of 2 people who had walked through similar darkness. When the Richardson ranch came into view, sprawling and prosperous with its large main house and multiple outbuildings, Beatrice felt her nervousness return in full force. Mrs. Richardson turned out to be a plump, practical woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an efficient manner. She walked Beatrice through the house, explaining the duties that would be expected, and seemed pleased with what she saw. "You have good hands," she said, examining Beatrice's fingers. "Not afraid of work, I can tell. When can you start?" "Whenever you need me," Beatrice replied, hardly daring to believe this was happening. "Tomorrow, then," Mrs. Richardson decided. "Daniel can help you move your things. We have a nice room off the kitchen, private and comfortable. You will take your meals with us, and I will pay you $15 a month to start. Fair. $15 a month plus room and board. It was more than fair, It was salvation. "Yes, madam, thank you." On the ride back to town, Beatrice felt lighter than she had in weeks, even as the guilt of that lightness pressed on her conscience. Was it wrong to feel hopeful when Thomas was barely cold in his grave? But Daniel had said grief was something you carried, not something that stopped your life completely. Maybe he was right. "Thank you," she said as they approached her house, "for everything. I do not know why you helped me, but I am grateful." Daniel pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. "You want the honest truth, please?" "I saw you at the funeral," he said quietly. "I was in town that day, and I saw you standing there alone, and you had this look on your face like you were trying to hold yourself together through sheer will. It reminded me of how I felt 4 years ago. And I remembered how much it hurt that everyone wanted me to be fine before I was ready, how they all disappeared when the casseroles ran out. I thought maybe I could do for you what I wished someone had done for me. That is all. Nothing more complicated than that." Beatrice felt something shift in her chest, some locked door beginning to open. "That is not nothing. That is everything." The next morning, Daniel arrived to help her move her belongings. She did not have much, just clothing and a few personal items, some dishes that had belonged to her mother, and the photograph of her parents that she kept wrapped carefully in cloth. They loaded everything into the wagon in less than an hour, and then Beatrice stood in the empty house one last time, saying a silent goodbye to Thomas and the life they had built together, brief as it had been. "You will be all right?" Daniel asked softly, standing in the doorway. "I will have to be," she replied, but when she turned to face him, she found herself adding, "But it helps to know that someone cares whether I am or not." Life at the Richardson Ranch fell into a rhythm quickly. Beatrice rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast, spent her days cooking and cleaning and occasionally helping Mrs. Richardson with the endless mending that a household of ranch hands required. The work was hard but satisfying, and the Richardsons treated her with respect and kindness. She saw Daniel regularly, as he was one of the senior ranch hands and often came to the main house for meetings with Mr. Richardson or to pick up supplies. At first, their interactions were brief and polite, but gradually, as the weeks passed and autumn began to cool the brutal Texas heat, they started talking more. Daniel would find reasons to linger in the kitchen after meals, helping her wash dishes or chop vegetables for the next day's stew. He told her about the cattle, about the rhythm of ranch life, about the years he had spent learning his trade. She told him about her childhood in San Antonio, about her parents and the small joys of her life before Thomas. They never talked about love, but something was growing between them nonetheless, something warm and steady like the embers of a carefully tended fire. Beatrice found herself listening for his voice, watching for his arrival, feeling her heart lift when he smiled at her. And she saw the way he looked at her, with a tenderness that made her feel seen and valued in a way she never had before. 2 months after she arrived at the ranch, Daniel asked if she would take a walk with him after dinner. The air had finally turned cool, the October evening bringing relief from the lingering heat. They walked along the fence line, watching the sun set in brilliant streaks of orange and purple, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. "I have been thinking," Daniel finally said, his voice uncertain in a way she had never heard from him before. "About timing and propriety and what is right." Beatrice's heart began to pound. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I know it has only been 2 months since Thomas passed, and I know that people will talk if I say what I want to say. But I have also been thinking about what you told me once, about how you did not expect to be widowed so young. Well, I did not expect to find someone who makes me want to hope again, someone who makes me remember what it feels like to care about more than just getting through another day." She stopped walking and turned to face him, the dying light painting his features in gold and shadow. "Daniel, I am not asking for anything you are not ready to give," he continued quickly. "I am just telling you that I have feelings for you, Beatrice, real feelings. And I know I should wait. I know I should give it more time, but I have lost too much in my life to waste time pretending I do not care when I do." The words hung between them, honest and raw and terrifying in their vulnerability. Beatrice felt tears stinging her eyes, but they were not tears of grief this time. They were tears of relief, of recognition, of finally allowing herself to acknowledge what she had been feeling but had been too afraid to name. "I feel it too," she whispered. "And I have felt so guilty about it, like I am betraying Thomas by having these feelings when he has only been gone such a short time." Daniel reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and took her hand in his. The touch sent warmth spreading through her entire body. "Thomas would not want you to spend your life alone," he said gently. "Any decent man would want his wife to find happiness again. How can you know that?" "Because I know that if our situations were reversed, if I had died and my wife had lived, I would want her to find someone who treated her well and made her smile. I would want her to have a life full of love and joy, not just empty years of mourning me." The simple wisdom of it made Beatrice realize how much she had been punishing herself, how she had been treating any moment of happiness as a betrayal rather than as the natural human need to heal and grow beyond loss. She squeezed Daniel's hand, feeling the calluses and strength in his fingers. "I am not ready for everything," she said honestly, "but I am ready to try. I am ready to see where this goes." "That is all I am asking," Daniel replied, and the smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long, dark night. They began courting properly after that, though they kept it quiet out of respect for appearances and the fact that Beatrice was still technically in mourning. Daniel would take her for walks in the evening, always within sight of the ranch house to preserve propriety. They would sit on the porch after dinner sometimes, talking about everything and nothing while Mrs. Richardson watched with knowing, approving eyes. Beatrice learned more about him during those long conversations, learned about the childhood he had spent learning ranch work from his father, about the wife he had married at 22 and lost at 24. Her name had been Sarah, and their daughter had been called Emily, and he spoke of them with love but without the raw, bleeding pain of fresh grief. "Does it ever stop hurting?" Beatrice asked one evening as they sat watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "It stops being the only thing you feel," Daniel said thoughtfully. "The love does not go away, but it becomes something you carry alongside other feelings instead of the thing that drowns everything else out. Sarah will always be part of me, but that does not mean I cannot build a new life with new love." "Do you think Thomas would understand if he knew?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think anyone who truly loved you would want you to be happy. And I think you deserve to let yourself want that too." The permission in those words, the gentle insistence that her happiness mattered, cracked something open inside Beatrice. She had spent so long being practical, being the good daughter who married for security, the good wife who did her duty, the good widow who mourned appropriately. But what about being Beatrice, who wanted and needed and deserved love? "I do want to be happy," she admitted. "With you." Daniel turned to look at her, his blue eyes intense in the starlight. "Then let me make you happy. Let me try." Winter came to the Texas hill country with its usual mix of mild days and occasional cold snaps. Beatrice had been at the ranch for 4 months, and her relationship with Daniel had deepened into something solid and real. They still had not kissed, maintaining a careful propriety that she appreciated even as it sometimes frustrated her. But there was an understanding between them now, an unspoken promise that they were building toward a future together. Just before Christmas, Daniel asked to speak with her privately. They walked to the barn, where he had prepared a small surprise, a corner cleared and decorated with pine branches, and a single lantern casting warm light over a simple bench he had built. "I know it is not much," he said, suddenly nervous. "But I wanted somewhere we could talk privately, somewhere special." "It is perfect," Beatrice said, touched by the effort he had made. They sat together on the bench, close enough that their shoulders touched. Daniel took her hand, and she noticed his fingers were trembling slightly. "I have been thinking about timing again," he said. "It has been almost 5 months since Thomas passed. I know that is not long by some people's standards, but I also know that life is uncertain and short, and I do not want to waste any more time than we already have." Beatrice's heart began to race. "What are you saying?" Daniel turned to face her fully, and in his eyes she saw everything she had been hoping for and everything she had been afraid to want. "I am saying that I love you, Beatrice Keller. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you laugh when something surprises you. I love how you have survived loss and kept going, how you never let bitterness take root in your heart. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that you are cherished and valued and seen." Tears were streaming down Beatrice's face now, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone. What Thomas and I had was good, but it was not this. This is different. This is everything." "Marry me," Daniel said, the words both a question and a prayer. "Not right away if you are not ready, but someday soon. Marry me and let me spend every day showing you what it means to be truly loved." Beatrice knew she should probably say she needed time to think, should probably worry more about what people would say about the widow who remarried so quickly. But she had learned something important over these past months. Life was too precious to waste on fear and too short to ignore real love when it found you. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." Daniel's face transformed with joy, and then, finally, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, nothing like the dutiful kisses she had shared with Thomas. This kiss felt like coming home to a place she had never been before, like finding something she had not known she was missing. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing heavily, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "We will do this right," he said. "Proper courtship, proper engagement, a proper wedding. I want everyone to know how much I love you." "People will talk," Beatrice warned, though she found she did not care as much as she thought she would. "Let them talk," Daniel replied firmly. "We know the truth. We know what we have been through and what we have found together. That is all that matters." They told the Richardsons the next day, and while Mrs. Richardson did raise her eyebrows at the speed of things, she was ultimately supportive. "Life is hard enough without denying yourself happiness when you find it," she said practically. "You too have my blessing." They decided to wait until spring to marry, both to allow a bit more time to pass since Thomas's death, and because Beatrice wanted a proper wedding dress, something pretty that would mark this new beginning. The engagement period was sweet and chaste, full of stolen moments and growing anticipation. Daniel began building them a house on a piece of land Mr. Richardson sold him at a generous price, a small plot about a mile from the main ranch. Beatrice would visit the construction site on her days off, watching the walls go up, planning where furniture would go, letting herself dream of a future she had thought was lost to her. "It will be a good house," Daniel said one sunny February afternoon as they stood in what would become their bedroom. "Strong walls, good roof, safe." "It already is a good house," Beatrice replied, taking his hand, "because it will be ours." The wedding took place on a beautiful April morning in 1886, nearly 8 months after Thomas's death. They married in the small church in Bandera, with the Richardsons and several ranch hands in attendance. Beatrice wore a simple but lovely cream-colored dress that Mrs. Richardson had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that Daniel had picked himself that morning. As she walked down the aisle toward where Daniel stood waiting, his face full of love and wonder, Beatrice felt the last pieces of her grief settle into their proper place. She would always carry Thomas with her, would always be grateful for the kindness he had shown her, but that chapter of her life was closed. This was her new beginning, her real love, her future. "Dearly beloved," the pastor began, and Beatrice felt Daniel's hand take hers, steady and sure. When they exchanged vows, her voice was strong and clear. "I, Beatrice, take you, Daniel, to be my husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you through whatever life brings. You showed me that asking for comfort in grief was not weakness, and you gave me something far greater than comfort. You gave me love, real and true and lasting." Daniel's vows were equally heartfelt, his voice thick with emotion. "I, Daniel, take you, Beatrice, to be my wife. I promise to protect you, cherish you, and love you every day of my life. You reminded me that my heart could heal, that life could offer second chances, and that love can bloom even in the hardest seasons." When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, and Daniel kissed her in front of everyone, Beatrice felt joy so intense it almost hurt. This was what she had needed all along, not just comfort or security, but to be truly, deeply loved by someone who chose her every single day. The reception was held at the Richardson Ranch, with tables set up outside under the warm spring sun. There was food and music and dancing, and Beatrice laughed more than she had in years. When Daniel swept her into his arms for their first dance as husband and wife, she felt like she was floating. "Happy," he murmured against her ear. "Completely," she replied honestly. They spent their wedding night in their new house, the furniture mostly still in crates but the bed assembled and made up with fresh linens. Daniel carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture, and then set her down gently in their bedroom. "I want you to know," he said seriously, taking both her hands in his, "that we can take this as slowly as you need. There is no rush. We have all the time in the world." Beatrice felt a rush of love for this man who was always thinking of her comfort, her needs, her feelings. But she had been thinking too, and she knew what she wanted. "I do not want to go slowly," she said. "Not tonight. Tonight, I want to be fully your wife in every way." The tenderness and passion that followed was everything Beatrice had read about in novels but never truly experienced. Daniel touched her like she was precious and sacred, but also with desire that made her feel beautiful and wanted. It was so different from the awkward, perfunctory intimacy she had known with Thomas, so much deeper and more connected that she finally understood what all the fuss was about. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through their window, and Beatrice felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. "I did not know it could be like that," she admitted softly. Daniel pressed a kiss to her forehead. "It is like that when two people truly love each other, when they are building something together, something real and lasting. Is that what we are doing? Building something lasting every single day," Daniel promised, "for the rest of our lives." The first year of their marriage was everything Beatrice had hoped for and more. She continued to work part-time for Mrs. Richardson, more because she enjoyed it than because they needed the money, as Daniel's wages were sufficient to support them comfortably. They furnished their little house piece by piece, each addition feeling like a small victory, a mark of their growing life together. Daniel taught her to ride horses properly. Not just the side saddle riding she had learned as a girl, but real riding that let her feel the power and freedom of galloping across open land. She taught him to appreciate poetry and music, reading to him in the evenings while he whittled small wooden figures that gradually filled their shelves. They made love frequently and joyfully, learning each other's bodies and preferences, building a physical connection that matched their emotional one. And when Beatrice discovered she was pregnant in the fall of 1886, their happiness felt complete. "A baby," Daniel breathed, his hand spreading across her still flat stomach with wonder. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he replied. "Beatrice, you have given me everything. A second chance at love, at family, at life. I never thought I would have this again." The pregnancy was not easy. Beatrice suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first 3 months, and Daniel hovered anxiously, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, holding her hair back when she was ill, worrying constantly. But as the months passed and her belly swelled with their child, the sickness faded and was replaced by anticipation. They spent winter preparing the second bedroom as a nursery, painting the walls a cheerful yellow, and building a cradle that Daniel sanded until it was smooth as silk. Beatrice sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small everything was, how fragile. "What if I am not a good mother?" she worried one evening as they sat together, Daniel's hand resting on her rounded belly. "You will be a wonderful mother," he said firmly. "You are kind and patient and loving. Our child will be blessed to have you." "What about you? You have done this before. Are you afraid?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I am afraid of losing you," he admitted. "I am afraid of something going wrong, of history repeating itself. But I am also hopeful in a way I have not been in years. This baby represents everything we have built together, everything we have survived to reach this point. That means something." Their son was born on a warm May evening in 1887, after a long and difficult labor that left Beatrice exhausted, but exhilarated. Daniel stayed with her throughout, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, refusing to leave despite the midwife's protests that it was not proper for husbands to be present. When the baby finally arrived, wailing lustily and perfect in every way, Daniel cut the cord with shaking hands and then burst into tears. "A son," he kept saying. "We have a son." They named him Thomas Daniel, honoring both the husband who had been kind to Beatrice and the father who would love him. Little Tommy, as they called him, had Daniel's blue eyes and Beatrice's auburn hair, and he was the most beautiful thing either of them had ever seen. The early months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful. They took turns walking the floor with Tommy when he cried at night, learning his different sounds and needs, marveling at every small change and development. Daniel was a devoted father, never complaining about dirty diapers or interrupted sleep, always ready to soothe or play or simply hold his son. "I worried I would not know how to do this again," he confessed one night as he rocked Tommy to sleep. "That too much time had passed, that I had forgotten." "You have not forgotten anything," Beatrice said softly. "You are a wonderful father." "He will never replace Emily," Daniel said quietly, "but I love him so much it scares me." "I know," Beatrice replied, understanding the complicated emotions that came with loving a second child after losing a first. "But he is not a replacement. He is his own person, his own blessing." As Tommy grew from infant to toddler, their little house filled with laughter and chaos. He was an active child, curious and fearless, constantly getting into mischief. Daniel taught him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, setting him on the gentlest horse and leading him around the paddock while Tommy shrieked with delight. Beatrice found herself thinking often about the journey that had brought her here, from the devastated widow standing alone at a grave to the happy wife and mother she had become. Sometimes she felt guilty about how thoroughly her life had changed, how the grief that had once consumed her was now just a small, quiet part of her history. "You ever think about your first family?" she asked Daniel one evening after they had put Tommy to bed. "Every day," he admitted. "But not in the way I used to. Before, thinking about them was like pressing on a wound that would not heal. Now, it is more like looking at old photographs, remembering them with love but without the sharp pain." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Beatrice said. "I feel the same way about Thomas. I am grateful for the time we had, but I do not ache for him anymore. Is that wrong?" "No," Daniel said firmly, pulling her into his arms. "It means you have healed. That is not wrong. That is beautiful." When Tommy was 2 years old, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to do, and in the spring of 1890 they welcomed a daughter they named Rosalina, after both their mothers. Rosie was a calmer baby than Tommy had been, content to observe the world with solemn gray eyes before breaking into smiles that melted everyone's hearts. Tommy was fascinated by his little sister, wanting to help with everything, and Daniel joked that they now had their hands more than full. Their family continued to grow over the next several years. Another son, James, arrived in 1892, followed by twin girls, Anna and Alice, in 1894. The little two-bedroom house became far too small, and with Mr. Richardson's help, Daniel built an addition, expanding their home to accommodate their growing family. Life was busy and sometimes overwhelming, but it was also rich with love and laughter. Beatrice would sometimes stop in the middle of the chaos, with children running through the house and Daniel teaching one of them to rope fence posts, and feel overwhelming gratitude for the second chance she had been given. The years passed in the way years do when you are busy living life, marked by birthdays and holidays and small moments that accumulated into a beautiful whole. Tommy grew into a serious boy who loved books and learning, while Rose was artistic and dreamy. James was the adventurer, always coming home with scraped knees and wild stories, and the twins were inseparable, their own complete unit. Daniel continued to work at the Richardson Ranch, eventually becoming the foreman when the previous one retired. The additional income allowed them to save money, to plan for their children's futures, to feel secure in a way neither of them had when they were younger. Beatrice expanded her role too, starting a small business making and selling preserves and baked goods in town. It was something she enjoyed and was good at, and it gave her a sense of accomplishment beyond her roles as wife and mother. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1896, Daniel surprised her with a new piano, a beautiful upright that must have cost months of savings. "You always talked about how your mother played," he explained as she stared at it in shock. "I wanted you to have one of your own, to teach our children and to have something that is just yours." Beatrice threw her arms around him, overwhelmed with love. "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Daniel replied. "The day I knocked on your door was the luckiest day of my life." "The second luckiest," she corrected with a smile. "The luckiest was when you actually fell in love with me." "No," Daniel said seriously. "I loved you from the first moment I saw you standing at that grave. It just took me a while to realize it." As their children grew older, Beatrice and Daniel made sure to tell them the story of how they met, how love could bloom even in grief, how asking for help was not weakness but strength. They talked about Thomas and Sarah and Emily, making sure those first families were not forgotten but honored as part of the journey that had led to this second family. Tommy eventually went to college, the first in either family to do so, studying to become a teacher. Rose married a local rancher and started her own family, staying close enough that Beatrice saw her grandchildren frequently. James followed his father into ranch work, though he eventually bought his own small spread with his parents' help. The twins remained close, both marrying in their early 20s and settling in nearby towns. As Daniel and Beatrice moved into middle age, their house became quieter but no less full of love. They had the time now to take long walks together, to sit on their porch in the evenings and watch the sunset, to remember all the years they had built together. "You have any regrets?" Beatrice asked one evening when she was 52, and Daniel was 54, their hair graying but their love as strong as ever. "Not a single one," Daniel replied without hesitation. "Every choice I made led me to you, and you were worth everything. Even the pain." "Even the pain," he confirmed, "because it taught me to appreciate what we have. It taught me that love is precious and life is short, and we should hold tight to the people who matter." Beatrice leaned into his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the absolute certainty of his presence in her life. "I used to think comfort was the best I could hope for," she mused. "That day when you showed up at my door, I was just hoping for a way to survive. I never imagined I would find this." "What is this?" Daniel asked, though his smile suggested he already knew. "Everything," Beatrice said simply. "Love and family and a life that matters. You gave me all of that." "No," Daniel corrected gently. "We gave that to each other. You saved me as much as I saved you." As the new century dawned in 1900, Daniel and Beatrice celebrated their 15th anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren. Their house was full of noise and laughter and love, 3 generations gathering to honor the couple who had built this family from the ashes of their separate griefs. Tommy, now a respected teacher with a wife and 2 children of his own, stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us that love is not about perfect circumstances or perfect timing, but about choosing each other every day. Who showed us that asking for help is brave and that offering help can change lives. Who proved that second chances are real and worth fighting for." Everyone raised their glasses, and Beatrice felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. She looked around at all these people, this family that existed because a grieving widow had accepted help from a cowboy who understood her pain, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Daniel and Beatrice sat together on their porch, holding hands in the darkness. 15 years, Beatrice said softly. "It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all." "I would do it all again," Daniel said. "Every single moment. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts," he replied, "because they made the good parts mean more. They taught us not to take anything for granted." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the Texas hill country, the cicadas and distant coyotes, the rustle of wind through the oak trees. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Beatrice asked. "About how grief is something you carry, not something you get over." "I remember." "You were right," she said. "I still carry Thomas with me, but I also carry you and our children and all the love we have built. The weight of grief is still there, but it is balanced now by so much joy that it does not feel heavy anymore." Daniel squeezed her hand. "That is all I ever wanted for you, for us, to find that balance." As the years continued to pass, that balance remained. They weathered the challenges that came with aging, with children growing up and moving away, with the inevitable changes that life brought. But through it all, their love remained constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. When Daniel's health began to fail in his late 60s, It was Beatrice who cared for him with the same tenderness he had always shown her. And when he died peacefully in their bed in 1915, holding her hand and surrounded by family, she grieved, but she did not break. Because Daniel had been right all along, grief was something you carried, and she was strong enough to carry it. But this story is not about that ending. This story is about the years of love and joy and family that came before, about the widow who asked for comfort and the cowboy who gave her something far more precious. It is about second chances and healing hearts, about the courage to love again after loss, about building a life together one day at a time. In the end, Beatrice and Daniel's love story was not defined by how it ended, but by how it was lived, in the thousands of small moments and choices that added up to a lifetime of devotion. They proved that it is never too late to find real love, that grief and joy can coexist, and that sometimes the most profound comfort comes not from words or gestures, but from the simple act of being truly, deeply loved. Their children and grandchildren carried those lessons forward, telling the story of how Beatrice and Daniel found each other in the darkest moments of their lives and built something beautiful from shared pain and mutual understanding. It became a family legend, the story of the widow and the cowboy, of asking for help and offering love, of surviving loss and choosing hope. And on warm Texas evenings, when the family gathered on the porch of the house that Daniel built and Beatrice made a home, they would remember and honor the love that started it all, the love that taught them what it meant to truly comfort and be comforted, to love and be loved in return. The house still stands today, passed down through generations, a testament to what two broken people can build when they find each other at exactly the right moment. The piano Beatrice loved still sits in the front room, played now by great-great-grandchildren who never knew her but carry her legacy. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, you can almost hear the echo of their laughter, the sound of a family built on the foundation of a love that began with a simple knock on a door and a cowboy brave enough to offer comfort to a grieving widow. That comfort became everything: partnership, passion, family, and a love that lasted through all the years they were given and beyond, into the memories and lives of everyone they touched. It was proof that even in the hardest times, in the deepest grief, hope remains possible. Love remains possible. Second chances remain possible. All it takes is the courage to ask for help and the grace to accept it when it comes, to recognize that comfort can become something greater, that grief can transform into joy, and that the human heart has an infinite capacity to heal and love again. Beatrice and Daniel discovered this truth together, and in doing so, they created a legacy that would outlast them both. A story of love in the Wild West that proved romance and second chances were not just possible but worth fighting for. Their story reminds us that love finds us when we need it most, often in unexpected forms and at unlikely moments. It teaches us that the deepest connections are forged not in spite of our pain, but often because of it, that shared grief can become shared joy, and that the courage to be vulnerable is rewarded with the gift of true intimacy. As the sun sets over the Texas Hill Country, painting the sky in the same brilliant colors that Beatrice and Daniel watched together for so many years, their story lives on. It lives in the land they loved, in the family they built, in the house that sheltered their growing love, and in the hearts of all who hear their tale and remember that asking for comfort in grief led to a cowboy giving comfort called being loved, and that love changed everything.